I'm going to have a little talk with you about shaft weight and shaft flex and how it affects the direction of your golf ball and the output of your shots. If you've watched other videos on the channel, you will see where I talk about where your sternum is and where your speed is to influence and have more predictability in the outcome of your shot. So a quick update on that. If I swing from a certain place, I'm going to get a certain direction of the golf club. If I have my sternum over to the left, I then go more out to in. And then if I have my sternum to the right hand side, I then go more in to out. So we can use our sternum in different places to influence what angle we get into the ball at and through the ball at. And to amplify the output of that, if I put my sternum there and I concentrate my speed there, so I make noise there, I make noise after the golf ball, I'm more likely to amplify that sternum idea to get different flights on the shot. So I've forced out a fade there because my sternum and my speed were after the golf ball. And then just to show you the opposite, I get my sternum to the right and I make my speed here. I make it before the golf ball and I get a very different outcome. I get a very different shape on the shot. So what does that mean with shaft flex and shaft weight? Now, when we swing the golf club, the shaft bends on the way back and then it releases on the way through. So a softer flex shaft will have more bend and release in it compared to a stiffer flex shaft. Now I'm talking in the same type of shaft when I talk about that, because there could be a scenario where there's a different profile of shaft that says extra stiff and another profile of shaft that says stiff, but the extra stiff is actually softer than the stiff in a different type of shaft, so do bear that in mind. If I've got that shaft bending and releasing into the ball through the ball, that's going to affect where I can make noise. That's going to affect the ease or difficulty of making that noise. If something is extremely stiff, if we've got an absolute barge pole in a golf club, it's going to be harder to get it to react and get it to make noise. So if I get a ladies flex shaft, I can really easily make noise. I can really easily make that exerted effort in the right place and get the ball to behave however I want it to behave. And then with a super stiff shaft, it's just a little bit harder to make that happen. So those that have a lot of pace, the stiffer flexes can help you hone in and funnel in where you make that noise. If you have a shaft that's too soft for you, it will bend and release at different rates. It will vary where it releases. So what we tend to see if you've got a shaft that's too soft is we see a bigger dispersion in a group of shots. And then if we have a shaft that's too stiff, we tend to find that we can't get it to react, we can't get it to release back into the ball. They'll tend to go to the right, but they'll tend to be a bit more dead in flight, generally speaking. So when we're looking at shaft flex, it's not just the flex, it's the type of shaft. And sometimes I've gone stiffer in flex because that type of shaft is softer in general. And then with a shaft that's already quite hard and doesn't bend much, maybe we need to go a little bit softer in that type of shaft to make it work best. Custom fitting, or at least testing different products, is key. Or like some people, you buy it, you try it, you like it, you keep it, you don't like it, you sell it. And before I had my own shop, that is exactly what I did. And then you start to learn what sort of shafts that you like, what sort of clubs that you like. And then we go into shaft weight. Now where something's heavier, it's a lot harder to make noise. And sometimes the weight of the shaft and the flex of the shaft come hand in hand to a degree. But if I have a really lightweight shaft or a really lightweight tool, it's going to be very easy for me to make that noise really early because there's not as much mass to move through the target, through the ball. But I can also manipulate it. I can make that noise late. I can make that noise early, but it is easier to make the early noise with a lighter component. If I go to something very heavy, a different tool entirely, this has got some weight to it. This is like a weighted training aid club. It is rather heavy. Now because this club is heavier, I've got more mass to bring into the ball. So if I try and make the noise earlier, it delays it. It delays where I can make the noise. So generally we'll hit them lower because we've got less loft. If I get speed back here, I get more loft at impact, generally speaking. There is an anomaly there. If the shaft is really light but also really twisty, we can get a bit more twist on the shaft, which then de-lofts the head at impact. But that is another area to be talking about. What we'll often see is shafts between 45 grams and 70 grams in a driver. You might see some stock shafts at 55, 60, 65, something like that. But if we're more towards that 45 gram shaft in a driver, we're going to find it easier to make noise earlier. We're going to find it easier to to hit a draw. That's why when I do tests, I get more left bias with a lighter, more active shaft. And when I go heavier and stiffer, it tends to go lower and righter because I can't generate the speed as easily, or it takes longer to generate it during the swing. Someone made a comment a little while ago saying, how do you manage to hit that A flex, that senior flex shaft pretty decent? It's like, well, because I know it's going to kick more, I know it's going to launch more, so I can put my speed a little bit later, so it's not as tip happy, so it's not as trigger happy. If I get my speed too far back with a really lightweight shaft, it's going to go it's going to go really far left. So to summarize, shaft flex is how much bend we have in the shaft. Different types of shaft can have different amounts of bend. Within one type of shaft, say we've got a Tenside blue in regular stiff, extra stiff, they're going to conform, they're going to be stiffer in the extra stiff than the regular. And then if we go into like a hazardous black Gen 4 with a regular stiff and extra stiff in that, those shafts might not sit very close, they'll be very different from each other. It might be that the regular in that one is like harder and harder to release, harder to make noise than the extra stiff in the blue. Sometimes it crosses over, it's a weird spectrum. But jump in the comments if you found some scenarios like that. I do have an old video with bad editing and bad noise and bad sound that does highlight those factors. A heavier shaft is harder to make noise with, but if someone's already quite strong, powerful and fast, it can tame them a little bit. It can just slow them down a little bit so they don't get out too early. So they can delay their release into the ball and not hit the ball as far left. So covered a few topics from there, maybe lost a bit of structure to the discussion, but jump in the comments if you've got any information or feedback from this. And I'll see you on the next video.